Chapter 6. Wolf jammed the sandwiches into his pack and got ready to follow Jem, who was already on his way. "Move it," was the last thing Jem said before he disappeared down the hill without a backward glance. Wolf kicked his pack several times to dislodge any hitchhiking wasps and threw it on his back. His stings throbbed like knife wounds and the muscles had seized up in his legs. His early morning pack training had been good for fitness, but it hadn't prepared him for hills. The climb down from the waterhole became steeper and steeper until eventually Wolf needed to go backwards to keep his footing. The weight of his bag tipped his centre of gravity, making him unsteady and awkward. "Don't wait for me, will you?" Wolf muttered. At last the rocks and smooth walls gave way to terrain that was more open and grassy. There were different obstacles now, gorse and scrub, but it was easier to get a foothold. Way up in the distance, Jem paused and crouched down. He seemed to be inspecting the ground. Wolf stepped up his pace. "Come on," he called in a hoarse whisper when Wolf was within earshot. "There's sign. We're onto something." And then Wolf felt it, the surge of adrenaline that pushed his tiredness aside. "Sign? Like pig shit?" "Yes, not today's, but we're in the territory." Jem stood up, still holding the old poo. "Where are the dogs?" Wolf asked. "Following a scent. Hopefully we won't see them again until they've bailed up a pig. Let's carry on as we are. The wind's good. In our faces." The wind was awful in their faces, Wolf thought. Dust and grit blew into his eyes, and he cursed the fact that he hadn't brought sunglasses. He saw his homework desk with his sunnies lying beside his books, and as they walked, Wolf thought about home and what it was usually like on a Saturday. It made him think about the way he wanted to live when he got the chance to choose. They walked in silence for 20 minutes. Wolf was lost in his thoughts when he saw Jem waving at him to hurry. "Hey," he whispered when Wolf got closer. "This is fresh." He dropped down beside a black pile in an area of bracken. "Look, there's crap everywhere." Wolf could never have imagined that fresh pig turd would get him excited, but once he'd knelt down beside Jem and felt the warmth of the black piles, he high-fived and laughed. Jem wiped his fingers on the grass. "Some of these are seriously big heaps of shit," Jem said, staring around in admiration. "Yeah? The king, perhaps?" "Maybe, but I'm thinking a prince might be all we need today with only 2 dogs on our team and one of them injured." "Any pig will do," Wolf said. "Exactly. Now we have to stay quiet so we don't interrupt Tag when he's finding. He'll get onto one soon, and then it'll be all go." Jem surveyed the hills around them. "Best bet is we stay high for a while until we know where the dogs are. No point racing down the hill to find they've chased the pig back up, don't you think?" Wolf couldn't agree more. A moment later, Jem changed his mind. He seemed amped and unable to stay still. "Let's go down a bit. If we follow this ledge and keep the wind in our faces, we could wait over there." Jem jabbed at a distant spot on the next hill. "That slope looks as if it's been ploughed. I want to check it out." The turned-over area was bigger than it looked from a distance, and it stretched down to the gully below. "Have pigs done this?" Wolf asked. "They sure have. They're pests that wreck farmland." Jem kicked the mounds of black soil with his boot. "This is fresh rooting." Fortunately, Wolf and Davy had done some research, courtesy of Dr. Google, and Wolf knew what Jem was talking about. Even so, he had to say it so that he could repeat it back later. "Yeah, he's been rooting all right." Jem pulled some binoculars out of his bag and perched himself on the edge of the hill. He aimed the lens at the bracken and fern at the bottom of the gully and watched with his shoulders pulled up to his ears. "Can you see any pigs?" Wolf asked. I'm looking for my dogs. I think I saw a flash of Tag's tail. Really? Wolf wondered if Tag and Ralph were leading them on a merry dance and had quietly parked themselves up on a sunny hillside. "Let's have another snack while we wait, huh?" Jim asked. Wolf watched him strolling back to get his pack and thought again that he was pretty fit for an old guy with thinning hair and a greying beard. His beard was fascinating and bristly. Wolf had seen leaves, some egg sandwich, drops of water and, most recently, dust and grit all caught in those whiskers. Now Jim was unzipping his lunchbox again and reaching for a biscuit. "Isn't this a great sport?" Jim passed the biscuits across and Wolf took one. "Nah, take a handful. We're going to get him soon. You need the energy." Wolf took about 6 biscuits and crouched down opposite Jim. "So you reckon they're onto something?" "Tag's a brilliant finder. He knows what to do. This is a good spot for us to wait. High enough to hear the dogs as soon as they start to bark, yet not too high to freeze, and we've got the breeze in our faces." In fact, Jim stuffed the last of his biscuits into his mouth. "I might take a leak, then stretch out for 5 minutes. Old buggers like me need a shut-eye to recharge." Jim leapt up and went over to some rocks to pee. He came back, found a place to sit, and leaned his head back on the hillside. He shut his eyes, a piece of biscuit quivering in his beard. Wolf figured it was about 10:30. He wondered if his parents were stressing out about him being on this hunting trip. They probably imagined him mauled by a wild pig or crushed and broken at the bottom of a rock face. It was a shame they couldn't see him resting on a grassy hillside. He tried to picture his father up here in the hills, enjoying a 5-minute recharge, but he couldn't. "I'm going to be like Jim," he thought, "and be chilled out." Wolf felt around, moved a couple of stones and rested as well. "That's the magic sound." Jim leapt up as if he'd been stung again. Wolf listened, and in the distance he could hear the dogs barking. Wolf needed a pee and a drink of water, but Jim was already moving. "Come on, move fast, but don't charge in. We don't want to make things harder for the dogs," Jim said before jumping over the ledge and beginning his descent. Wolf had no option but to follow. "They're down there," Jim shouted. The bush was far below them and slightly over their left shoulders as they hugged the hillside. "I wonder if we should run up that hill and come down on that side of the action." Jim scoured the landscape, trying to figure out the best way of getting to the pig without being spotted first. "Please don't suggest we climb back up and come down a different way," Wolf begged silently. He waited and watched as Jim took a moment to shade his eyes with his hand and stare at the surrounding hills. He had untidy eyebrows that erupted like old toothbrushes, and his hand sliced them horizontally. "If I wasn't worried about Ralph, I'd say we should climb back up and come down on the other side of the bale," Jim said, "but I think he won't have his usual holding power, so let's head straight down and chance it." Wolf felt a moment of gratitude to the wasps. Heading straight down involved diagonal slices into the hill, interspersed with bum-sliding sections where it was too steep to stay upright. Gorse grabbed at their clothes and Wolf wrapped his right hand in his beanie for protection. The dogs were barking far below them, and he wondered how the hell they would get the pig out of the gully if they did kill it. After slipping and skidding down the hill, Jim said, "Right, now we're in business." "Have I got time for a piss?" "Well, that's a classic." Jim's eyes laughed. Sweat sat in the furrows of his brow, and Wolf could see that his eyebrows might be useful as umbrellas. "All right, but hurry. There's a story right there. In your timing," Jim said as Wolf scuttled away. "Leave the bags here," Jim said when Wolf was back. "Once we turn with the wind behind us, the pig is going to panic and we have to be ready for anything." Jim's hand rested on his knife, the blue handle visible between his fingers. Can I carry the knife? Next time, huh? Jim mock-punched Wolf's shoulder. If you get home in one piece with some fresh pork for your mother, we'll talk about weapons after that. He didn't wait for an answer, but said, let's go. They turned in the fork of the path and headed towards the fray. Tag and a black bristly pig were facing each other. Tag kept barking as he moved from side to side in front of the pig, but just out of its reach. The pig, with his big heavy shoulders lowered, twisted and turned, trying to escape Tag or have a jab at him. Ralph was on the side of the action and he had his own dance moves. He tried to dart in and get a hold of an ear or a cheek. The pig, an ugly spiky beast, was backed up to a feeble tree. Thorny bushes surrounded the base of the trunk and the whole scene was being played out on the edge of a drop. This is tricky. Jim gave a low whistle. How the hell do I get behind that? It was impressive watching Ralph and Tag work as a team. They darted in and out, taking nips where they could, ever mindful of the pig's tusks. Their snarling and barking didn't let up as they taunted the pig and hopefully wore him down. The pig turned to face Ralph after Ralph nipped his back leg, and it gave Tag the chance to get in and grab the tip of the pig's ear. Hang on, Jim yelled. Tag twisted with the pig and hung on, his neck stretched and tight. The pig squealed and staggered and tossed its head until Tag was thrown off. Then it lunged at Tag's hind legs, but Tag scuttled away before he could get him. The action was distorted as it moved from sunlight to shade, but Wolf saw Ralph moving in from the other side to launch his own attack. He grabbed the boar's snout, and amidst the squealing from the pig, there was the sound of Ralph whining in pain as he bit down. His face was swollen to football size, and his eyes were dark slits. The boar swung his head, but Ralph held tight. The scene was a frenzied combination of dust, panic and noise. Wolf had expected the pig to squeal, but the noise it made was more primitive. It was like a panic alarm, a repeated cry for mercy. Not pig-like, but desperate and eerie, and it stopped Wolf in his tracks. Jim's mouth was set in a firm line as he waded into the riot to make his kill. His knife flashed in the sun, and he added to the chaos by yelling at his dogs. Hold him, Tag, hold him. Get in there, Ralph. Hold him, Ralph. Jim ran around the fight and into the shade, but he couldn't get behind the pig. It swung its head in a massive arc, and Ralph was flung off his hold. They saw him tossed away, a flying rag dog. He smashed into a tree and lay stunned as the pig made its break. Look out! Wolf heard Jim shout, but he was already looking for an escape route. He grabbed hold of a sharp branch on a frail tree and swung himself up. The boar, head lowered, ran straight at him.